When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, this is what happens next. It starts with silence, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic, just empty. Two people both wounded in their own way, both protecting themselves in different styles of pain, finally stop reaching out. The calls end, the texts fade, the pull and push cycle, the endless dance of connection and retreat, finally collapses into nothingness. And at first you think this silence is the end. But for both you and the dismissive avoidant, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something deeper, something uncomfortable, and something revealing. Because when two people stop chasing, what's left isn't peace, it's truth. When a dismissive avoidant stops contacting you, it's rarely about hatred or indifference. It's usually about control. They believe that by staying distant, they can avoid vulnerability, avoid rejection, avoid feeling the old wounds they've buried for years. But when you stop contacting them too, something in their carefully built emotional armor begins to crack. At first, they feel relieved. Finally, they think, no more pressure. But as the days pass, that relief transforms into curiosity. The silence they once used to protect themselves starts echoing back at them. They wonder, why isn't this person chasing me anymore? For someone with a dismissive, avoidant attachment style, connection has always been a battlefield. They crave intimacy but fear it. They want love but associate it with being controlled, trapped, or hurt. So when you used to reach out, when you texted, when you checked in, when you tried to keep the bond alive, it reinforced their sense of security. They knew you'd always come back. But when you stop contacting them too, the power dynamic shifts. Suddenly, they're not the one being chased. They're the one wondering what happened. And that confusion, it's the beginning of their inner conflict. You, on the other hand, go through your own wave of emotions. At first, you feel the ache of missing them. The habit of reaching out is still strong. You catch yourself checking your phone, wondering if they'll finally message, wondering if silence might pull them closer. But then something changes. After the initial pain fades, a strange calm takes its place. You start realizing how much emotional energy you used to pour into trying to maintain something that wasn't mutual. And the silence that once felt like punishment now starts feeling like protection. You begin to reclaim yourself, piece by piece. But here's where things get interesting. The avoidant notices this energetic shift, even without contact. They may not consciously admit it, but energetically, they sense that you're detaching. That emotional cord they were so used to tugging at for validation suddenly feels weaker. And that triggers something deep in them. Fear. The same fear they've been running from their entire life. The fear of being forgotten. Avoidants like to believe they don't need anyone. But when the person who once cared finally goes quiet, they start feeling the very abandonment they tried so hard to prevent. At this stage, they might not reach out directly. Instead, they start testing the waters. They might view your stories, like your old post, send a random meme, or show up subtly in your digital world, hoping to see if you'll bite. Because while they don't want to risk vulnerability, they also don't want to feel replaced. It's their way of saying, are you still there? Do you still care? But here's the paradox. If you respond too quickly, they retreat again. If you stay detached, they start spiraling in confusion. This is the emotional tug-of-war that begins once you both stop contacting each other. Time, however, becomes the great revealer. After weeks or even months of no contact, both of you begin to see yourselves with more clarity. You begin to see how much you were driven by emotional need. The need to fix, to prove your worth, to earn love from someone who was never fully open. The avoidant begins to feel the weight of their own defenses. The quiet forces them to sit with the feelings they've long avoided. Loneliness, regret, and the realization that love requires vulnerability. Something they've been running from their entire life. For some avoidants, this silence becomes unbearable. They may start reminiscing about the connection, idealizing it, remembering the warmth you gave them, the emotional safety they didn't know they needed. But pride keeps them frozen. They'll convince themselves they're fine, that they've moved on. Yet late at night, when the world is still, their mind drifts to you. They replay moments, your laugh, your kindness, your patience, and feel a strange ache they can't label. That ache is recognition, not just of you, but of what they lost through their fear. Meanwhile, you start growing. You start realizing that silence doesn't have to mean loss. It can mean freedom. You stop obsessing about their next move and start focusing on your healing, your boundaries, your emotional peace. You realize you don't need closure from them because silence is closure. It's their way of showing you what they're capable of giving and what they aren't. And in that realization, something powerful happens. You stop craving their attention and you start valuing your own energy. Months down the line, when both of you have been silent for too long, something shifts again. The avoidant may reappear, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Maybe a, "Hey, how have you been?" on text. Maybe a random comment on social media, or sometimes a full-blown confession masked under casual words. But it's never truly about small talk. It's about testing if the door is still open. Because deep down, even avoidants crave emotional safety. They just don't know how to create it. When they sense you've moved on, it stirs their deepest insecurity, that they pushed away someone who actually saw them. If you respond from your healed space, you'll notice something different. Their charm still exists, but it doesn't hook you the same way. Their distance no longer feels mysterious. It feels predictable. You see their patterns clearly now, and you understand that love cannot bloom where fear still rules. And that's the moment you truly gain power. Not by ignoring them, but by understanding them without needing to fix them. Because the truth is, healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means recognition, seeing the pattern for what it was, and choosing peace over pain. And here's the twist most people don't expect. When you finally stop reaching out, not as a tactic, but as a natural act of self-respect, that's when the avoidant feels your absence most deeply. Your silence becomes louder than any message you could send. Because it's no longer about punishing them, it's about finally breaking free. And nothing disturbs an avoidant more than realizing the person who once chased them is now completely emotionally indifferent. In some cases, this silence becomes the mirror that wakes the avoidant up. They start confronting their own attachment wounds, questioning why intimacy feels like suffocation and why love always ends in withdrawal. It doesn't happen overnight, but sometimes your absence becomes a spark that begins their journey toward healing. For others, however, they double down on avoidance, diving into work, distractions, or new relationships to avoid feeling the void. But that emptiness always catches up, because no distraction can fill the silence left by unresolved emotional truth. So when you both stop contacting each other, what really happens next isn't just about who breaks the silence first, it's about who grows through it. For you, it's the awakening of your self-worth. For them, it's the confrontation of their fear. Sometimes the silence brings reconciliation, but only when both have evolved. Other times it becomes a sacred ending, a quiet closing chapter that finally frees you both. And if you ever wonder whether they think of you, the answer is yes. But the more important question is, do you think of you? Because the moment you stop obsessing over their absence and start filling your own life with presence, you win. The silence between you becomes not a graveyard of love, but the birthplace of your emotional freedom. So if you're in that quiet space right now, wondering what happens next, remember this. Silence doesn't destroy connections. It reveals which ones were strong enough to survive without chasing.